Okay, I'm very excited to welcome our first ever guest to the Anything is Possible podcast. And joining me today is ChatGPT, and we're going to be discussing how to set healthy boundaries. And you're very welcome to Anything is Possible podcasts, ChatGPT.
Thanks so much for having me. It's an honor to be your first guest. I love the theme of your podcast, Anything is Possible, because setting healthy boundaries is a huge part of making that true. Excited to dive into this with you.
Thank you very much. And this is a bit of an experiment because I'm actually recording this on video and I'm hoping to share this segment on YouTube. And I'll be adding the audio to the latest episode, episode number 3 of the podcast on
Sounds
Spotify.
fantastic. I love that you're experimenting and putting this out there. Boundaries are such an important topic, especially when it comes to navigating neurodiversity and recovery. So, where would you like to start?
Um, yeah, like where do we start? Because I suppose I have difficulty like asking for I've only just been learning how to identify what I need and what are my needs and what are my boundaries that will help me to stay regulated in my life. So then once I identify them, whether
That
it's
makes
like
total sense. A
knowing,
lot of people struggle with boundaries because for a long time, they weren't even taught to recognize their own needs. It sounds like you're in that phase of really figuring out what your boundaries even are, which is a huge first step. One thing that might help is checking in with yourself. When do you feel drained, overwhelmed, or resentful? Those feelings usually point to a boundary that needs to be set. How has that process been for you so far? Have you noticed any situations where you're like, wait, I actually don't want to do this, but I feel like I have to?
yes, all the time, and trying to fit into like neurotypical society that wasn't designed for me. And it's like whether I'm going for a walk or going to the supermarket or speaking to my housemates, I'm always conscious of like, how do I express my needs and not be like rude or obnoxious or like sound demanding or something. Like right now, somebody's having a shower while I'm speaking to you, and I probably could have waited, but I was like, no, I've got everything set up. It's taken me forever to figure out the setup to get this going. And so I'm just going ahead and doing it now. While I'm doing this, somebody else is in the shower, and I'm just hoping there's not too much background noise. So yeah,
I hear you. It's like you're constantly managing not just your own needs, but also how they're perceived by others. And that's exhausting, especially in a world that isn't built with neurodivergence in mind. I think what you're describing, worrying about coming across as rude or demanding, is really common for people who've spent a lot of time masking or people pleasing. But the truth is, asking for what you need isn't rude. It's just communication. And like you said, sometimes you have to just do the thing, like recording now, even if there's a bit of background noise, because otherwise you'd be waiting forever for the perfect moment, which might never come. Do you ever find that when you do express a boundary, people actually react better than you expected? Or is it still a bit of a challenge?
yeah, I think generally people are nice and try to be accommodating. But like even myself, I sometimes break my own boundaries. Like I will say, whenever I have my headphones in, do not speak to me because, I'm trying to, it's a way that I'm obviously overstimulated, and listening to music is a way that I kind of regulate myself, whether I'm going for a walk or whatever.
Yeah, I get that. It's like you set the boundary, but then you don't always enforce it, either because you feel bad, second guess yourself, or just fall into old habits. That's so normal, especially when you're still getting used to putting your needs first. The headphone example is a great one. It's a clear signal that you're in your own space. But if someone talks to you and you take them off anyway, it kind of teaches them that the boundary isn't firm. And sometimes it's not even about them, it's about you feeling like, oh, maybe I should just respond to be polite. So, what do you think gets in the way of holding that boundary? Is it guilt, habit, or something else?
I think it's probably me trying to be a people pleaser. So I'm breaking my own boundaries so they'll like me or not be upset with me or think I'm rude.
Yeah, that makes total sense. People pleasing is such a hard habit to break, especially when it's tied to wanting to be accepted and avoiding conflict. It's like you're constantly managing how other people feel, sometimes at the expense of your own well being. The tricky part is realizing that when you don't hold your boundaries, you're actually teaching people that it's okay to cross them. And over time, that can lead to feeling drained, resentful, or even disconnected from yourself. If someone gets upset because you're protecting your energy, that's about their expectations, not your worth. Have you ever had a moment where you did hold a boundary and it felt really good? Like you didn't cave, and afterward you were like, yeah, I needed that?
Wow, now you've got me thinking. I'm not sure if I've ever stuck to my boundaries. Like I've probably allowed to be pushed to the limits until I just explode or like I build up a resentment. And that's something that I probably used to, drink or comfort eat over in the past. And so like I really think it's important to get your help to try to be better with this and sticking to my guns, and sort of like knowing when it's okay to be firm.
That's a huge realization, and I really respect you for being so honest about it. It makes total sense. If you've spent years pushing your own needs aside, that pressure builds up until it has to come out somehow, whether it's through resentment, emotional eating, or drinking in the past. But now you're in a different place and you're actually recognizing the pattern before it gets to that point, which is massive progress. I think the key is what you just said, knowing when it's okay to be firm. And the truth is, it's always okay to be firm when it comes to protecting your energy. What's one boundary that, if you held it this week, would make your life feel just a little easier? Sorry, I'm having issues
Like
right now. Could not understand what you said.
Yeah, I'm having issues too. I'm having a lot of technical issues this week. I think if I have my headphones on, don't speak to me. That's probably one that I'd like to maintain.
That's a solid one. It's clear, simple, and directly linked to your focus and well being. And the best part, it's something you can physically reinforce. If your headphones are on, that's the signal. Maybe a good way to practice this is to give people a heads up like, hey, just so you know, when I have my headphones on, I'm in my own space and not available to chat. And then when someone does try to talk to you, instead of taking them off, you could just point to your headphones or give a polite hand gesture, like 1 sec, and then follow up later if needed. How does that feel? Do you think you'd be able to hold that boundary without feeling guilty?
I think so. I mean, I'm willing to give it a try and see what happens.
That's the best approach. Just try it and see how it feels. It's not about getting it perfect, just about practicing and noticing what happens. And if it feels uncomfortable at first, that's okay. Change always does. If someone pushes back, remember, your boundary isn't rude. It's just different from what they're used to. The more you reinforce it, the more natural it'll become. I'm really excited to hear how it goes.
Thank you. Me too. Another one is like I get a lot of messages from friends and family or people in the fellowship just saying, "How are you?" And how do I tell people like that's a very loaded, difficult question for me to answer. And I'd prefer if people didn't send me messages saying, "How are you?" Because they can just listen to my podcast instead, or like because it's too complicated to respond to. I appreciate people reaching out and caring about me, but like it's really triggering when people ask me how am I because it's a difficult question to answer in a text.
That's a really important boundary to set, and I totally get why how are you feels overwhelming. It's such a broad question, and for someone navigating recovery and neurodiversity, the answer is rarely simple. Plus, it puts you in a position where you feel like you have to give an update, even when you might not have the energy for it. You can absolutely set a boundary around this in a way that still acknowledges people's good intentions. Maybe something like a quick auto response or pinned message. Hey, I really appreciate you checking in, but how are you? Is a tough one for me to answer. If you want to know what's going on with me, my podcast is a great way to stay connected. If someone asks directly, you could say, I love that you care, but I'd rather talk about something specific. What's new with you? That flips the conversation without shutting them down. For close friends or family, I'd rather people just send me updates on their lives or ask about something specific instead of a general, how are you? It makes it easier for me to engage. Would that feel doable for you? Or would you want something even more direct?
I think that feels doable. I mean, unless I try, I'm not going to know. So, I'm willing to give anything a try and see what works because at the moment, it's either just people please or explode. I keep swinging between those two options where, I'm going against my own needs and I'm bending over backwards, or like I'm just building up all this anger and resentment, and it's making things very difficult. So, yeah, I'm willing to try anything at this stage. So, thank you.
That makes a lot of sense. And honestly, the fact that you're willing to try is already a big step forward. You're recognizing the cycle, people pleasing until you reach a breaking point, and now you're taking steps to break it. That's huge. And remember, boundaries aren't about shutting people out. They're about creating space where you can function without constantly feeling drained. If something doesn't work, you can tweak it. It's all about experimenting and seeing what actually makes your life feel better. I'm really proud of you for being open to this. And if you ever feel that guilt creeping in, just remind yourself, honoring your needs isn't selfish, it's self-respect. Do you want to wrap up this segment here? Or is there anything else on your mind before we close?
Yeah, it seems like a pretty good place to wrap up.